All right, welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andy Mack. And even though the government shutdown is over, that does not mean everything is back to normal. Not for people that we've chronicled so much in terms of the SNAP program, people that are most vulnerable, but also children that receive some Head Start benefits. And that's what we wanted to get into right now here on Live Now from Fox. This is a post on social media from the 74, a nonprofit that covers U.S. education from childhood through college, saying providers and parents are hopeful all centers will be back up and running in 2 weeks, though funding and staffing challenges could worsen delays. Let's discuss this more here on Live Now from Fox and bring in Amanda Geduld with the 74. Thank you so much for your time here on Live Now from Fox, and just get into some of the impacts of this, because Head Start program provides so much relief, so much food to young kids. What exactly impacts, even though the shutdown is over, could still be happening?
Thank you so much for having me on. Yeah, so as you mentioned, despite the government reopening, there are still ramifications for Head Start families. As of Friday afternoon, we know that about 8,800 kids, ages 0 to 5, were still locked out of their Head Start classrooms. And the reason for that, Head Start funding is a little bit wonky, but essentially most Head Start programs are in a 5-year grant cycle, but still need to be awarded new funding every year. So grants that were supposed to be awarded on October 1st and November 1st haven't come through and still haven't. Probably will take up to about 2 weeks for those to come through, and a lot of centers can't reopen until that funding starts to flow.
Yeah, and you mentioned the 2-week time frame. That could be an eternity for some families. What stories are you hearing about that, about how people going back to work, but obviously the resources not there?
Yeah, so it's important to note that it's not just 2 weeks. By the time these centers do reopen, it'll be closer to about 4 weeks for a lot of these families. And I think one thing that folks don't always realize about Head Start is that not only does it provide childcare for families and early learning opportunities, but it also connects families to all sorts of programming ranging from food to housing assistance and parenting courses. So a lot of these families are relying on Head Start for so much more than childcare. But you're right, sort of at its core, a lot of these families are looking at 4 weeks without a place to send their kid. Most families who use Head Start resources are working families. So those parents are trying to go to work every day. And in talking to a lot of these parents, what I've heard from them is that they're having to cut back hours. They're having to rely on family members. In some cases, they're having to quit their jobs altogether or rely on other forms of childcare that perhaps aren't as reputable or well-resourced.
Yeah, when we talk about childcare, it's all cyclical because obviously one leads to the other in that way. Do we have any facts or figures on the amount of people, the amount of kids that might be affected?
Sure. So Head Start serves around 700,000 kids each year. At the peak of closures, about 10,000 kids had lost their seats altogether. Right now, we're down to about 8,800. In talking to folks at the National Head Start Association, they are hopeful that some of those centers could reopen as early as this week, just with the promise of funding. So in total, there were 65,000 seats that were at risk of closing, and ultimately about 10,000 of those did.
All right, and I want to ask you, because obviously the term, the program called Head Start is just that, to hopefully give everyone kind of a boost up. Does the shutdown, does the staffing, these funding impacts have long-term ramifications?
Absolutely. That's what I'm hearing from providers on the ground. In many cases, the teachers who are working in Head Start classrooms were Head Start students themselves and sort of worked their way through the system and were able to go back and get degrees and then come and serve in Head Start classrooms. That being said, one concern that I've heard is that teachers during this shutdown were not getting paid. A lot of those teachers live paycheck to paycheck, and they may have had to go and find employment elsewhere. While teachers I've spoken to are hopeful to return to the classroom, some of them might not be able to, which could make classrooms harder to reopen in 2 weeks. Kids could have also gone to new child care centers. And in the long term, I've heard over and over again just how harmful this has been for the trust that families have placed in Head Start, that they've relied on this, since the 1960s as a really reliable program. And this is a really unprecedented level of chaos they're experiencing.
And we know how much kids really rely on those schedules, just the organization of it day in and day out, and that's just not there amid this shutdown. And there also potentially could be a looming shutdown. We talked about some of the grant, kind of the cycles of it in place, but another government funding deadline potentially the end of January. We know SNAP potentially funded through 2026, but that's not the case for Head Start. Can you talk about the concern level there that into 2026 there might be more uncertainty?
Correct. Yeah. And just going back to one thing you said about routines for kids, a lot of students who are served by Head Start are students with disabilities, students with IEPs. I talked to one mom whose son uses Head Start programming and he has autism. And she mentioned that for him, routines were incredibly important to help him feel safe and stable. And this has been really destabilizing for him. And it's been challenging for her to explain to him why he doesn't have, a teacher to see. In terms of the looming, January 30th date that a lot of Head Start centers are looking to, yeah, I'm sort of hearing this combination of relief that the government is reopened, but also this looming anxiety, like you said. Unlike SNAP, Head Start has no guaranteed funding beyond January 30th. Senator Baldwin of Wisconsin has put forward legislation that, if passed, would fund Head Start through 2026 with a slight increased budget. But of course, there's no guarantee of that. So I think Head Start providers are hopeful that the government will come to some sort of compromise that will allow for longer term funding.
Yeah, that is very good and obviously very hopeful out there that this does not happen. No Groundhog's Day in terms of this. Again, I want to ask you because we saw SNAP and states step in to provide funding for SNAP. Have states, have other local or private communities stepped up in the way that we've seen for SNAP? Is Head Start getting other funding in other ways?
Absolutely. Yeah. So about 80% of Head Start funding does come from the federal government, but there are also local sources of funding as well. Head Start is an interesting program because no two Head Starts look the same. Some of them are in-home childcare services. Some of them are housed within public school districts. Some of them are run by nonprofits. And so the seats that we did see stay open during this shutdown were able to do so sometimes through the generosity of private grants and private donations, sometimes because of a larger organization that was able to float funding, and sometimes through bank loans. I've heard from a number of providers just ways that communities are stepping up. So for example, one Head Start organization is housed within a private Montessori school, and apparently kids within the Montessori school were making breakfast for the kids in the Head Start organization. And so while that was shared as a very hopeful story, the provider was also pretty disappointed that that was what was happening.
Yeah, obviously it's shared as a hopeful story, but people hope that doesn't have to come to be in that way. And we also saw with SNAP benefits, some of the states stepping up and they would not get reimbursed by the federal government. That was a big component. Amanda, anything else that we're missing? Because obviously so many people rely on Head Start and obviously so many kids within this program, childhood all the way up. Anything else that we're missing? Anything other notes you want to let us know about?
Sure. I mean, I think one really important thing to know here is that this was not an isolated incident. Over the past 10 months, Head Start has faced a number of cuts and other, moments of chaos and disruption. A number of the regional offices that serve Head Start were closed, about half of them. Scores of employees at the federal level were fired. There have been funding freezes and then restarts. So, while folks are excited to get back to the classroom, they are really emphasizing that this feeling of chaos is not new, but they really do hope that it subsides.
All right, very good. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time here on Live Now from Fox Reporting because it is so very important. I appreciate you again. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.